Welcome back to our channel. We hope you will have a wonderful learning experience here with us. You can download and listen to these audiobooks at your preferred time. Our videos are designed as audio podcasts to help you keep studying at times where you may not be able to watch video or as you are completing another task, so you can better use your time. You can listen to these tutorials at night, doing another task, while taking a walk, lunchtime, or at any of your convenience. This is the Chapter 4 of Freshman Inclusiveness course taught in all the Ethiopian universities. It is tailored exactly to the fitting of the Ethiopian Ministry of Education curriculum, but is also very useful for any related course. I am very happy you have chosen this channel in your study and politely ask that you subscribe, like and share the channel for more amazing tutorials. Now, without further ado, let's begin our course. Chapter 4, Promoting Inclusive Culture. Time allotted, 5 hours. An inclusive culture starts from the premise that everyone in the school, industry, community and society should feel that they belong, realize their potential, and contribute to the life of people with disability and vulnerabilities. An inclusive culture involves the full and successful integration of diverse people into a workplace or industry. While an inclusive culture certainly encompasses a commitment to workplace diversity, it is not limited simply to basic representation. It indicates a climate in which respect, equity, and positive recognition of differences are all cultivated, and the social and institutional response to disability poses no barrier to a positive employment experience. In this chapter, we will learn how we can promote inclusive culture. The specific contents addressed in the chapter are: definition of inclusive culture, dimensions of inclusive culture, policy related to inclusive culture, building an inclusive community, means of establish inclusive culture, inclusive values and indigenous inclusive values and practices. Dear learners, after the successful completion of this chapter, you will be able to define inclusive culture, discuss the dimensions of inclusive culture, evaluate policy related to inclusive culture, explain the process of building community for inclusive culture, discuss approaches of establishing inclusive culture, discuss inclusive values, explore and discuss indigenous inclusive values, and evaluate existing inclusive practices. Inclusion is a sense of belonging, connection and community at work. And inclusive organizations help people feel welcomed, known, valued and encouraged to bring their whole, unique selves to work. Culture is the ideas, customs, and social behavior of a particular people or society. An organization's culture is the culmination of the priorities, values and behaviors, which support their employees and how they work singularly, in teams and with clients. Culture plays a huge role in shifting the diversity needle and forming truly inclusive environments. Hence, an inclusive culture involves the full and successful integration of diverse people into a workplace or industry. Additionally, inclusive cultures extend beyond basic or token presence of workers who have disabilities. They encompass both formal and informal policies and practices, and involve several core values: representation, the presence of people with disabilities across a range of employee roles and leadership positions; receptivity, respect for differences in working styles and flexibility in tailoring positions to the strengths and abilities of employees; and fairness, equitable access to all resources, opportunities, networks and decision-making processes. Dimensions of inclusive culture. There are 3 dimensions/elements of an inclusive culture. 1. Universal design. 2. Recruitment, training and advancement opportunities. 3. Workplace accommodations and accessibility, Policy Practice 1. Universal design. One of the most heralded concepts in disability advocacy and cultures in the last decade is the concept of universal design. Universal design refers to the construction of structures, spaces, services, communications and resources that are organically accessible to a range of people with and without disabilities, without further need for modification or accommodation. While accommodations procedures remain a needed function of most contemporary institutions and industries, forward-thinking approaches to disability inclusion will frequently involve developing sites and resources that require no accommodation to be fully usable and receptive to people with disabilities. A few examples of ways universal design practices may apply in the workplace include routinely providing manuals, materials and forms to all employees in a variety of digital formats that are as readily accessible to people who use adaptive computer technologies as to other employees. Building workspaces accessible to people who use wheelchairs or other assistive devices, as well as to all other employees. Providing employees with a variety of flexible schedule and work options. This allows employees who have energy or functionality limitations to organize their time and strengths, and all employees are better able to manage time and life-work balance. 2. Recruitment, training, advancement opportunities. Recruitment. Effective recruitment of people with disabilities involves two components. 1. Accessible outreach and hiring practices, and 2. Targeted recruitment of workers with disabilities. Accessible outreach and hiring practices essentially entail making sure that outreach materials, networking and recruitment sites, communications, and application processes all include a range of accessible options, or are free of barriers that might inhibit people with disabilities from participating. Wherever possible, outreach and hiring resources generally should be equally accessible to workers with and without disabilities. For example, making recruitment literature and job applications readily available in digital and large print formats, or holding outreach events in spaces without stairs or other barriers and with accessible communications technology, helps to ensure that people with disabilities will be included in recruitment practices. Targeted recruitment involves specific outreach to people with disabilities. Although making general recruitment practices more accessible goes a long way towards building an inclusive hiring structure, individual employers are not always able to overcome existing barriers. For instance, when recruiting via externally sponsored job fairs that are not accessible. Therefore, targeted recruitment enables employers to reach and interview qualified people with disabilities. In turn, having accessible recruitment practices relative to hiring, materials and communications helps to ensure that targeted recruitment will be successful not just in identifying qualified candidates, but by making sure there are no barriers to effective outreach and eventual employment. B. Training. Training plays a dual role in the creation of inclusive workplace culture. The first consideration involves the degree to which people with disabilities have equitable access to training sites, events, and materials. The second concern relates to the training of managers, particularly middle management, and human resources staff, to work effectively with all people, including those with disabilities. The consequences of inadequate training are substantial, in reducing job satisfaction, with corresponding negative consequences for productivity and retention. In turn, companies favored by employees with disabilities make a concerted effort to create equitable and accessible training resources. C. Advancement. Research demonstrates that in order to have equitable opportunities for promotion and professional development, like most employees, workers with disabilities typically require access to mentoring. As with recruitment, mentoring and coaching involves a dual dynamic in which, Existing mentoring programs are advertised, implemented and maintained with attention to inclusion of workers with disabilities, and targeted mentoring and coaching programs specifically assist employees with disabilities. These may include the creation of explicit disability affirmative action policies related to promotion, targeted professional networking opportunities, and the establishment of disability affinity networks and related supports to encourage full integration into the workplace culture. 3. Workplace accommodations and accessibility, policy practice. Policy plays a critical role in generating meaningful inclusion of people with disabilities. In addition to recruitment, training and advancement, workplace policies need to carefully plan for the provision of reasonable accommodations. When assessing the effectiveness of existing accommodations policies, employee experiences can be described based on two measures of equity. The first indicator of an inclusive workplace culture involves the perception of a procedural justice, meaning that employees with disabilities perceive the accommodations policy as fair, accessible and functional. The practice of negotiating and providing accommodations constitutes an additional opportunity for generating an experience of a interactional justice. Interactional justice refers to the experience of feeling that the managers or colleagues with whom one is interacting are behaving fairly, reasonably and respectfully. Experiential and bottom-line outcomes. The benefits of inclusive cultures are specifically beneficial for employees with disabilities, but also have positive results for all employees, as they include a number of elements of a healthy work environment. Specific positive outcomes include reduced expenses corresponding to reduced employee turnover, increased worker commitment to and identification with organizational success, improved employee health and well-being, improved productivity, increased employee investment in work performance, reduced perception of discrimination and inequity, and improved cooperation and collaboration between co-workers, and between employees and management. Creating an inclusive organizational culture is challenging but extremely advantageous. Here's why and how. However, the business benefits and the outcomes of an inclusive organization: fairness and respect, value and belonging, safe and open, and empowerment and growth should be compelling enough to push forward. These are some of the benefits of an inclusive organization that needs to be considered: higher job satisfaction, lower turnover, higher productivity, higher employee morale, improved creativity and innovation, improved problem solving, and increased organizational flexibility. Inclusive education, when practiced well, is very important because all children are able to be part of their community and develop a sense of belonging and become better prepared for life in the community as children and adults. It provides all children with opportunities to develop friendships with one another. Building an inclusive community. What is an inclusive community? An inclusive community does everything that it can to respect all its citizens, gives them full access to resources, and promotes equal treatment and opportunity. Works to eliminate all forms of discrimination. Engages all its citizens in decision-making processes that affect their lives. Values diversity and responds quickly to racist and other discriminating incidents. An inclusive society aims at empowering and promoting the social, economic, and political inclusion of all, irrespective of age, sex, disability, race, ethnicity, origin, religion, economic, or other status. It is a society that leaves no one behind. We work to ensure that societies are open and inclusive to all. Here are things an organization can do to create a more inclusive workplace and, therefore, a more appealing place to work. Appropriately connect with employees. Interact with different people. Create employee resource groups. Place importance on inclusion. Hold better meetings. Invest in diversity training. And people have opportunities to experience a variety of social roles that include friendships, contributing to the community and gaining new skills. Some of the benefits of inclusion to the person are improved feelings of well-being and self-esteem. Why is building an inclusive community important? Acts of exclusion and injustice based on group identity and other factors should not be allowed to occur or continue. All people have the right to be part of decisions that affect their lives and the groups they belong to, and diversity enriches our lives, so it is worth our while to value our community's diversity. An inclusive community can be built at any time. The need to have an inclusive community, however, is most obvious when there has been a decision or an incident that caused harm to a particular group of people. It is important to consider the motivation behind an individual, a group, or a community's desire to build an inclusive community, because the motivation affects the following types and sequence of strategies selected. If there were a crisis, you might have to start with a strategy that transforms the conflict. If there were no crisis, but rather the vision of a community leader that sparked the effort, you might consider starting with a public education campaign. Resources available. More resources could be mobilized if the motivation came from a large institution or a local foundation. Amount of support and obstruction. If the dominant group in the community is just as motivated as any other group, there is likely to be more support. If, however, the dominant group has no interest in changing the status quo, there are likely to be more barriers. Rate of progress. If the major leaders and groups support the effort, progress is likely to be faster. Expected outcomes. If the goal is to raise awareness, everyone involved is likely to be satisfied if they learned new things about other groups. If the goal is to promote fair treatment of every group, everyone involved is more likely to be satisfied by policy change. IDRS's characteristics of an inclusive community. Inclusive communities do have the following set of characteristics: integrative and cooperative. Inclusive communities bring people together and are places where people and organizations work together. Interactive. Inclusive communities have accessible community spaces and open public places, as well as groups and organizations that support social interaction and community activity, including celebrating community life. Invested. Inclusive communities are places where both the public and private sectors commit resources for the social and economic health and well-being of the whole community. Diverse. Inclusive communities welcome and incorporate diverse people and cultures into the structures, processes and functions of daily community life. Equitable. Inclusive communities make sure that everyone has the means to live in decent conditions, that is, income supports, employment, good housing, and the opportunity to develop own ES capacities and to participate actively in community life. Accessible and sensitive. Inclusive communities have an array of readily available and accessible supports and services for the social, health, and developmental needs of their populations, and provide such supports in culturally sensitive and appropriate ways. Essential services identified include good schools, recreation, childcare, libraries, public transit, affordable housing and supportive housing, home care, crisis and emergency supports, well-coordinated and comprehensive settlement supports. Participatory. Inclusive communities encourage and support the involvement of all their members in the planning and decision-making that affects community conditions and development, including having an effective voice with senior levels of government. And safe. Inclusive communities ensure both individual and broad community safety and security so that no one feels at risk in their homes or moving around the neighborhood and city. Means of establish inclusive culture. An organization is inclusive when everyone has a sense of belonging, feels respected, valued and seen for who they are as individuals, and feels a level of supportive energy and commitment from leaders, colleagues and others so that all people, individually and collectively, can do their best work. To create an inclusive culture in which everyone feels they belong and is comfortable expressing their uniqueness, there are 4 key inclusive leadership behaviors. Empowerment. Enable team members to grow and excel by encouraging them to solve problems, come up with new ideas and develop new skills. Accountability. Show confidence in team members by holding them responsible for aspects of their performance that are within their control. Courage. Stand up for what you believe is right, even when it means taking a risk. Humility. Admit mistakes, learn from criticism and different points of view, and overcome your limitations by seeking contributions from team members. How inclusive culture establish. There are 5 stages in establishing inclusive culture. 1. Consider what you want to achieve and what the benefits will be. This first stage of the process involves looking at your organization, its size, the type of work it does, where it is located, who it employs, who uses its services, and what its goals are, and thinking about how it could become more inclusive. 2. Undertake an inclusion review of your workplace. When reviewing inclusion and equality in your organization, you should consider the following areas. The demographics of your organization and customer base. All organizations are different, so the first thing you will need to do is examine what the demographic makeup of your workplace is. Compiling and analyzing data on your staff by age, gender, ethnic group, religion or belief, sexual orientation and disability, and noting where in the organization's structure employees belonging to different groups work, will help you to identify any underrepresented groups and areas of occupational segregation. You should check employees' salaries according to membership of different groups, and check rates of progression within and through the grades. It is also useful to look at retention and exit rates by these groups. If possible, you should also collect information on the makeup of your customers. Finding out who uses your services and what their needs are is important if you are to ensure you have the right people, skills and approaches to meet these needs. Your formal policies and procedures. The formal policies and practices of your organization can tell you a lot about how much you have previously thought about inclusion, human rights and equality. When reviewing these policies, you will find it helpful to look at policies to deal with discrimination, bullying and harassment. Procedures to deal with tensions and difference between groups. Informal or unwritten working practices and arrangements for staff consultation and participation. 3. Decide where work is needed and create an action plan. Having reviewed your workplace in terms of equality and inclusion, the next stage is to decide upon the action you will take. Set out the key changes you would like to make as a result of your review. Prioritize these changes to help you decide where to start. Some measures you may wish to consider as part of your action plan are: actively involve all employees, consultation and participation, encourage employees to take part in monitoring, and promote the reasons for doing so. Extra measures and adjustments. Build a culture of inclusion and respect. Ensure the organization's core values include a commitment to equality, human rights and inclusive working. Create, extend or improve policies on equality and human rights and make sure other policies are equality-proofed. Take immediate action to address and tackle discrimination, harassment and bullying. Ensure the organization's core values include a commitment to equality, human rights and inclusive working. Create, extend or improve policies on equality and human rights and make sure other policies are equality-proofed. Take immediate action to address and tackle discrimination, harassment and bullying. Training for all staff on inclusive working, human rights and equality. Make inclusion a key management approach. Encourage and appoint equality and human rights champions. Encourage employee networks and forums. Promote culture-changing initiatives. Take an inclusive approach to recruitment, promotion and development. Make equality, diversity, human rights and inclusive working part of job descriptions. Monitor applicants and staff at different levels within the organization. Equality and human rights training for all staff involved in recruitment and a fair and transparent selection process. Attract candidates from the widest pool available. Reward talent and achievement rather than stereotypical indicators of success. Value skills achieved outside the workplace. Encourage and enable development for all. Offer mentoring opportunities to junior and new staff. Offer work placements, conduct exit interviews. Encourage engagement with the local community, employer-assisted volunteering. 4. Communicate the plan with staff and put the plan into action. Actively involve all groups of employees. In order to create a working culture of inclusion, respect and opportunity for all, it is essential that everyone in the organization, from the senior management to the most junior staff, is engaged with and involved in the process of creating this culture, and feels that their opinions and experiences are valued. Measures to promote inclusive working need to be thought of positively among employees, not as something that is done to them. There are several things to think about in this respect. Participation and consultation. Before drawing up a plan of action, it is essential to involve and consult employees to find out about their experiences, what they feel are the key issues affecting them and what action they would like to see taken to address these issues. Staff and any unions or other employee representatives should also be consulted at different stages in the plan's implementation, in order to get their feedback on the progress being made. The action plan should be a living document, capable of being adapted and developed over time. There are many different ways that you can consult and involve employees and their representatives. Some examples are: staff surveys can be used to gather information on a range of subjects, including the makeup of the workforce, responses and attitudes towards equality and human rights issues, and levels of job satisfaction among employees. Surveys can be designed so that responses can be analyzed according to membership of equality group or other relevant factors. Confidential surveys will attract a higher response rate. Focus groups provide more opportunity for in-depth consultation and debate with a smaller number of employees. They could be a useful forum in which to collect feedback on draft policies and action plans, and can be an indicator of wider staff attitudes. Engagement with employee networks and forums can utilize an important representative voice of staff from minority groups and can provide useful input into policies and action plans. 5. Review, monitor and evaluate the plan's impact and use what you find to plan future action. 10 Characteristics of an Inclusive Organization. 1. It accepts diversity and inclusion as a way of life. In an inclusive organization, one sees diversity at every level within the institution. Many cultures, traditions, beliefs, languages, and lifestyles are prevalent in both the workforce as well as the customer populations, and are respected without judgment. People are viewed as individuals who have come together to coordinate action towards the achievement of common goals. 2. It evaluates individual and group performance on the basis of observable and measurable behaviors and competencies. Employees have a clear understanding of their roles and responsibilities. They are evaluated based upon their actions, not the opinions of others. Goals and expectations are achievable. 3. It operates under transparent policies and procedures. There are no hidden rules of behavior that may be apparent to some groups and unknown to others. 4. It is consistent in its interactions with everyone. There is no double standard. Rules are applied appropriately and regularly throughout the institution. No one group is favored over another. 5. It creates and maintains a learning culture. Career development is encouraged and supported for all employees by management. Mentoring programs are robust, and include both formal and informal systems that meet the individual learning needs of all employees. Mistakes are recognized, and their consequences addressed, but they are viewed as learning opportunities rather than character flaws. 6. It has a comprehensive and easily accessible system of conflict resolution at all levels. It recognizes that conflict is inevitable in a complex multicultural organization, and it has systems in place to address conflict in a non-confrontational manner that respects the dignity and confidentiality of all parties. 7. It recognizes that it is part of the community that it serves. Employees, managers, and customers all come from the community. An inclusive organization is an active participant in community activities, and plays a vital role in addressing its needs. 8. It lives its mission and core values. People work for an organization because they believe in its purpose and goals. An organization that promises one thing and delivers other risks losing the trust and confidence of its workforce as well as its customers. 9. It values earned privilege over unearned privilege. Employees are recognized for their actions and accomplishments, not simply because of their titles or degrees. Customers are treated with respect regardless of their socioeconomic status or class. 10. It accepts and embraces change. Change is inevitable. An inclusive organization recognizes that current and past practices must constantly be reviewed and updated to meet the changing demands and needs of the industry, workforce, and customers. Inclusive values. Inclusion is most importantly seen as putting inclusive values into action. It is a commitment to particular values which accounts for a wish to overcome exclusion and promote participation. The 7 pillars of inclusion. Access. Access explores the importance of a welcoming environment and the habits that create it. Attitude. Attitude looks at how willing people are to embrace inclusion and diversity and to take meaningful action. Choice. Partnership, communication, policy and opportunity values are fundamental guides and prompts to action. They spur us forward, give us a sense of direction and define a destination. We know that we are doing, or have done, the right thing through understanding the relationship between our actions and our values. For all actions affecting others are underpinned by values. Every such action becomes a moral argument whether or not we are aware of it. It is a way of saying this is the right thing to do. Hence, Inclusive values are appreciating diversity, equality and equity, cooperativeness, participation, community, and sustainability are examples of inclusive values that are fundamental for successful inclusive education. Appreciating diversity, equality and equity, cooperativeness, participation, community, and sustainability are examples of inclusive values that are fundamental for successful inclusive education. A careful piecing together of a framework of values has resulted in a list of headings concerned with equality, rights, participation, community, respect for diversity, sustainability, nonviolence, trust, compassion, honesty, courage, joy, love, hope, optimism, and beauty. A values framework can be considered as a universe of interconnected meanings. 4.7 Indigenous inclusive values and practices. The term indigenous refers to a better understanding of, and respect for, indigenous cultures, develops an enriched appreciation of the existing cultural heritage. Indigenous ways of knowing were often discounted and discredited as non-scientific because they were rooted in the story of the people, their language, culture, art, mythology and spirituality. It was important to recognize the right of indigenous peoples to land, resources and sacred sites. Incorporating indigenous ways of learning into educational practices has potential to benefit both indigenous and non-indigenous learners. The 21st century skills needed in modern curriculum include collaboration, creativity, innovation, problem-solving, inquiry, multicultural literacy, etc. What is indigenous inclusion? Indigenous inclusion is defined as an organizational state that is embraced as a cultural norm, with enterprise-wide workplace strategies as well as a culture which invites the full participation of indigenous people into all aspects of business operations. It is where leadership and employees are welcoming of indigenous people, their experience and outlooks, where diversity is valued, the spirit of reconciliation has been embraced and calls to action have been acted on in meaningful ways. Features of an indigenous inclusion. 1. Inclusion has been embraced as a core competency and embedded into the organizational culture. 2. Companies share their organization's experience and achievements with inclusion and explain how it has helped their performance. 3. Human rights and responsibilities are promoted and respected. Employees are free of concerns related to basic equity issues. 4. Comprehensive indigenous procurement, recruitment and corporate social responsibility strategies have been developed as part of an enterprise-wide coordinated approach. 5. Indigenous people are employed and retained in all areas of the organization including the senior leadership and executive positions. 6. There are significant revenues and jobs gained by indigenous people and businesses through the organization's supply chain. 7. Indigenous community sustainable gains have been realized as a result of the relationships built between the company and the community. 8. High levels of indigenous employee engagement are seen and experienced in the organization. 9. Leadership has put into place the resources needed to sustain its indigenous inclusion strategy and it may have introduced an inclusion policy framework or statement. 10. Indigenous inclusion is integral to the mission and vision of the organization. A 7-stage model to indigenous inclusion. Indigenous Works has developed a 7-stage workplace model of indigenous inclusion which is called the Inclusion Continuum. The model depicts the roadmap that organizations follow to become more inclusive, gradually enabling more effective workplace and employment strategies to be developed. The continuum describes the organizational features and competencies needed at each stage to achieve elevated levels of performance in indigenous employment, business development, community relations, etc. Movement along the continuum depends on companies developing their cultural competencies, improving their understanding of indigenous people, their history and culture. Companies' position on the inclusion continuum can be measured from year to track and assess progress. Types of indigenous inclusion policies. There are quite a range of indigenous inclusion policies in use by companies and organizations throughout Ontario and Canada. The diagram below illustrates how some of those policies align with workplace needs. Some inclusion policies have a targeted application to specific areas of the workplace such as employment, indigenous community relations, indigenous business development or procurement. Other inclusion policies strike across the organization, providing an enterprise-wide approach to inclusion. What are inclusive practices? Inclusive practice is an approach to teaching that recognizes the diversity of students, enabling all students to access course content, fully participate in learning activities and demonstrate their knowledge and strengths at assessment. The aim of inclusion is to embrace all people irrespective of race, gender, disability, medical or other need. It is about giving equal access and opportunities and getting rid of discrimination and intolerance, removal of barriers. It affects all aspects of public life. Inclusive practice is about the attitudes, approaches, strategies, talent to ensure that people are not excluded or isolated. It means supporting diversity by accepting welcoming people's differences, promoting equality by equal opportunities for all. In addition, inclusive practice involves having an understanding of the impact that discrimination, inequality, social exclusion can have on an individual. Having an understanding of this ensures appropriate personalized care, support can be given. This enables the individual to develop self-respect, self-worth, also to maintain a valued role in society, the environment surrounding them. When we compare inclusive practice with practice which excludes an individual, inclusive practice gives an individual more confidence in the care that they were receiving. It gives them the option to have an input with the care they are having as they are being given the opportunity to do so. In the long run, this could improve the service user's health as they still have confidence in the careers. Practice that excludes the service user could have consequences on their own health. For example, if they spoke English and were provided with a care worker that spoke and understood poor English, could result in them not being able to communicate, from that they would like for dinner to whether they are feeling ill and may need to see a doctor, meaning that their health could deteriorate. Inclusive practices in education are based on 7 principles. Diversity enriches and strengthens all communities. All learners of different learning styles and achievements are equally valued, respected and celebrated by society. All learners are enabled to fulfill their potential by taking into account individual requirements and needs. Support is guaranteed and fully resourced across the whole learning experience. All learners need friendship and support from people of their own age. All children and young people are educated together as equals in their local communities. Inclusive teaching strategies refer to any number of teaching approaches that address the needs of students with a variety of backgrounds, learning modalities, and abilities. These strategies contribute to an overall inclusive learning environment in which students feel equally valued. Benefits of inclusive practices. The benefits of inclusive practices are numerous for both students with and without disabilities. Benefits of inclusion for students with disabilities. Friendships. Increased social initiations, relationships and networks. Peer role models for academic, social and behavior skills. Increased achievement of individual educational plan goals. Greater access to general curriculum. Enhanced skill acquisition and generalization. Increased inclusion in future environments. Greater opportunities for interactions. Higher expectations. Increased school staff collaboration. Increased parent participation. Families are more integrated into community. We have covered all the contents of Chapter 4. In summary, we have discussed how an inclusive culture involves the full and successful integration of diverse people into a workplace or industry. Additionally, we have also seen how inclusive cultures extend beyond basic or token presence of workers who have disabilities. There are 3 dimensions/elements of an inclusive culture. These are universal design, recruitment, training and advancement opportunities, and workplace accommodations and accessibility, policy practice. Inclusion has been directly advocated since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 and has been acted at all phases in a number of key UN declarations and conventions. An inclusive society aims at empowering and promoting the social, economic, and political inclusion of all, irrespective of age, sex, disability, race, ethnicity, origin, religion, economic, or other status. It is a society that leaves no one behind. We work to ensure that societies are open and inclusive to all. An inclusive community can be built at any time. The need to have an inclusive community, however, is most obvious when there has been a decision or an incident that caused harm to a particular group of people. Major characteristics of inclusive communities are integrative and cooperative, interactive, invested, diverse, equitable, accessible and sensitive, participatory and safe. An organization is inclusive when everyone has a sense of belonging, feels respected, valued and seen for who they are as individuals, and feels a level of supportive energy and commitment from leaders, colleagues and others, so that all people, individually and collectively, can do their best work. There are 4 key inclusive leadership behaviors, that is, empowerment, accountability, courage and humility. Inclusive values are appreciating diversity, equality and equity, cooperativeness, participation, community, and sustainability are examples of inclusive values that are fundamental for successful inclusive education. Appreciating diversity, equality and equity, cooperativeness, participation, community, and sustainability are examples of inclusive values that are fundamental for successful inclusive education. Indigenous inclusion is defined as an organizational state that is embraced as a cultural norm, with enterprise-wide workplace strategies, as well as a culture which invites the full participation of indigenous people into all aspects of business operations. Inclusive practice is an approach to teaching that recognizes the diversity of students, enabling all students to access course content, fully participate in learning activities and demonstrate their knowledge and strengths at assessment. Inclusive teaching strategies refer to any number of teaching approaches that address the needs of students with a variety of backgrounds, learning modalities, and abilities. These strategies contribute to an overall inclusive learning environment in which students feel equally valued. You should now be able to define and discuss inclusive culture, the dimensions of inclusive culture, approaches of establishing inclusive culture and inclusive values. You should also be able to evaluate existing inclusive practices, policy related to inclusive culture, and explain the process of building community for inclusive culture along with indigenous inclusive values. Subscribe to our channel to keep learning. Thank you for staying with us.